When people talk about cinematic videos, they usually picture big camera rigs, matte boxes, and expensive lenses. But after over a decade of making videos, I found that setup to be great for a lot of scenarios, but sometimes it just burns me out. So lately, I've been searching for a compact kit that could bring the fun back while still giving me cinema quality. And I think I finally found it. What's up, nerds? Welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, my name is Ben, and I make videos about filmmaking, gear, and camera stuff. So in this video, I'm breaking down a compact camera setup that I've been using for the past few months, a setup that has actually been making me pretty excited to go out and shoot again. And it all revolves around this, the 20mm autofocus anamorphic lens from Sirui. I'll walk you through what makes this special, some variations of the setup that I've been using, and I'll make sure to show you a bunch of footage that I've captured using this combo for the last 5 months or so. Now, we're just starting to unlock the potential of autofocus and anamorphic lenses, but for video content creators, this opens up a whole new world of creating. What I'm talking about isn't necessarily anamorphic, because we've had anamorphic lenses for nearly a century. What's different now is the combination of autofocus, a small form factor, and an accessible price point in tandem with anamorphic character. That's what makes this lens and other options out there, in my opinion, so exciting. And honestly, I feel like it's pulled me out of a creative rut that I've been in recently. I made a video a while back on the Sirui 40mm autofocus anamorphic, and I wasn't too impressed with the autofocus performance. I ended up not recommending it for that. But since then, Sirui did release a firmware update that's fixed a lot of issues that I've had with this lens, including the autofocus performance. I'll touch on that a little bit later, but for this video, I want to focus on the 20mm version of this lens, which was honestly great straight out of the box. Sirui did send me this lens back in January, but they're not sponsoring this video. No money changed hands, and they don't get any input or review on this video's creation. 20mm is one of the widest anamorphic lenses that I've ever used, maybe even the widest available period. It's technically an APS-C lens, but it almost covers full frame sensors. It does vignette a little bit around the edges in full frame, but a small crop or even active image stabilization will give you a clean image to work with. Now, I won't go super deep into every spec of this lens. You can find those on the product page, but here's what stands out to me. It's got the same high build quality as the 40mm, and it's a fully metal design with weather sealing, Cinegear aperture and focus rings, as well as switches for autofocus, manual focus, declick, and a custom button. It's a little bit shorter and lighter than the 40mm, which makes this lens a little bit more travel friendly. I've been using the blue flare model of this lens, but it's also available in a neutral flare, and it mounts to Sony E mount, Nikon Z, Fuji X, Micro Four Thirds, and Leica L mount. The regular price for this is $799, but it's currently on sale for $699. So here's where this lens really clicked for me. My wife and I go to Disneyland a few times a year. It's kind of our go-to getaway spot. And every trip I face the same dilemma. What camera and lens do I bring with me? Because Disneyland is visually incredible, and I want to make sure I capture that with my wife and I. And I've tried almost every compact gear combo you can imagine. I've researched, rented, and even sat on hold with Best Buy for hours trying to get a Fuji X100VI, which I've pretty much given up on, so whatever. But I always end up with the same bag, my Sony a7 IV or FX30 and a prime lens. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. I've gotten plenty of amazing footage and images with that, but after 7 trips and hundreds of photos to go through, I was getting a little bored. So this last time I brought something a little different. Not because I thought it was better, but it was something that gave me a different perspective on a place that I'd shot to death. And that shift from gear hunting to more of a creative reframing was exactly what I think I needed. The setup I took with me was my Sony a7 IV and the Sirui 20mm. I also brought the 40mm with me, but I ended up keeping it at the hotel for most of the trip because of how compact the 20mm was in my bag. Like I mentioned before, this lens nearly covers full frame. So on the Sony a7 IV, I would use it paired with the active image stabilization, which cropped in enough to minimize the vignetting when it's mounted to full frame. This would give me that ultra wide lens perspective. It was almost like an 18mm horizontal field of view. Then when I wanted to shoot a little bit tighter, I would switch to APS-C mode, essentially giving me 2 lenses in one. The autofocus performed surprisingly well throughout the entire trip. It kept single subject and architecture shots in focus with no hunting or issues that I could tell. It is also dead silent. That was one issue I ran into with the 40mm, was the autofocus sounded like gears grinding. Sirui's update to that autofocus did fix the autofocus noise on the Sony a7 IV, but when it's on my Sony FX30, it's still loud. Luckily though, the 20mm is silent on both cameras. It did a great job tracking my wife in continuous autofocus, and I never noticed myself fighting the lens to grab focus. The one thing is that this lens does lack optical image stabilization. I did bring a tripod with me for some shots and tried to shoot as close to my body as possible when shooting handheld, plus the active image stabilization turned on. That helped compensate for some of that as well. The one thing about active image stabilization on any Sony camera is that you do get a little bit of a jello effect on the sides, and shooting full frame with this lens kind of emphasized that. So on some of the footage that I got while I was in Disneyland, I did notice that happening. I also surprisingly grew to like the pincushion distortion on this lens. Typically that's not my favorite look. I prefer a barrel distortion, but on this lens, it was subtle in Super 35 and very prominent in full frame. I thought it would bother me more than it did, which it still stands out, but I don't think it's a deal breaker. Most of the time, the edges look sharp and upright, especially when focused closer to a subject to get that anamorphic separation with the distortion not being too distracting. At the end of the trip, I looked back at all the footage I got and was blown away at the results. The footage and even photos I was able to capture was different and new. And that just helped me to see this place that my wife and I have come to enjoy in a whole new perspective. You know, that was exciting for me. Now, obviously I didn't just use this lens in Disneyland, even though I think this would be perfect for that. In fact, a lot of creators and people purchasing this lens have been calling it the new wave of vlogging that can give you more of like a cinematic perspective with the anamorphic characters. While I think this lens is great for that, I do want to use this lens for a narrative project that I've been writing. That project is still very much in the beginnings of pre-production, but I did shoot some test footage for it using this lens and my Sony FX30. Just here in my house with me as the star, because again, I have no friends. The autofocus paired with Sony's new camera monitor app made it super easy for me to set up these quick shots to test some of the visual concepts that I have for the short film I'm working on. I did end up using a diopter filter for a couple of shots because minimum focus on anamorphic lenses is notorious for being long. If you're going to be shooting with anamorphic lenses, I highly recommend getting yourself some diopter filters. They make a big difference when shooting close to a subject. They do add a little bit of chromatic aberration because you're adding another element, and they can cause some serious flaring, but for a lot of situations, they're a really handy tool. Now, I want to walk you through my go-to setup or rig build with this camera. Now, the brains that I've been using the most is the Sony FX30 because that's what this is meant for, but you could also use the Sony a7 IV. You could also use an FX3 if you have that. I don't have one. Now, in reality, this is all you need. That's the nice thing about shooting on a 1.33 times squeeze factor is that you can easily monitor your footage without having an external monitor. Where if you were shooting on like a 1.5x or a 2 times, it would be a little more difficult to see what's going on. The Sony FX30 and the Sony FX3 do have internal de-squeeze previews, but turning on that setting disables the autofocus. But the solution that I found to get around this is 2 ways. One is just to rig up a top handle with a small like 5-inch monitor with HDMI. That's totally fine, but it requires you to carry more batteries and just rigs out your camera a little bit more. But if you want to be more compact, my personal favorite has actually been using my phone as a camera monitor. Sony a while back came out with a new camera monitor app that wirelessly connects to any Sony camera and is actually pretty dang good. Better than what they've done in the past, at least. It doesn't have a crazy reach, but it does allow you to de-squeeze your image and even has some exposure and framing tools like false color and grid overlays. I mounted to my camera using this phone cold shoe adapter from SmallRig. I think it was like $20 on Amazon, and it articulates, so you can just adjust it and it's a solid build quality. I'll leave a link to this in the description if you're interested. But having that flexibility to wirelessly monitor my shots lets me do a lot more solo filmmaking when my friends are too lazy to come help me film my passion projects. I'm kidding. The wireless monitor with your phone would also be great to let you use this on a gimbal for some roller shots. I really need to do a car commercial with this thing. That would be so sick, shooting a car commercial with this combo. Man, that'd be a banger. I also don't think this lens or the 40mm should be slept on when it comes to photography. Lately, I've been experimenting with anamorphic widescreen photography because of a photographer that I discovered on Instagram. All of her work looks like stills from a movie and are just so good. I think that she just crops her images to reflect the 2:4:1 aspect ratio, but this lens would give you that kind of delivery straight out of camera with the subtle anamorphic character. Now, she may already be shooting on anamorphic, but man, her work is so good. Anyway, you can clinically analyze this lens and you would see that it has pincushion distortion, some chromatic aberration, some focus breathing, decent oval bokeh, which actually, speaking of bokeh for a second, The 40mm had this like hexagon bokeh that was not very oval shaped, and this lens has more of a smooth oval bokeh. It looks much better than the 40mm in my opinion, much more anamorphic, it's a little bit more squeezed, and it's just, yeah, it's more of that oval shape. The flaring is also prominent in very bright, direct light sources, but the only time I really got the flare to show up was when I pointed a flashlight at it directly. It was cloudy the entire time that we were in Disneyland, so I never got to see it then. I did get the flare to show up while shooting some landscape footage directly at the sun, and I will say the flare is really nice and well controlled. It's subtle when it needs to be, but if you want it to be more of that harsh flare that takes up a majority of the frame, you can get a really hard artificial light source to activate that flare. I would prefer the neutral flare, but the blue flare is a classic anamorphic look. Now, at the end of the day, testing and using this lens, I wasn't looking for perfection. Most anamorphic lenses are not clinically perfect, and they have plenty of flaws. In fact, Sirui tends to be more clinical and sharp with their anamorphic lenses compared to brands like Blazar or even Kawa. This lens, I think, is a nice meet in the middle. It has a good amount of character to separate it from spherical lenses, but still looks sharp and consistent, even shooting at T1.8. It's got a compact design, autofocus capabilities, and I feel a lot more confident to bring this with me to places that I normally wouldn't bring my big camera rigs. And I think that alone makes this lens worth it. Anyways, I hope this video was helpful for your search in compact cinema setups or lenses. If you're interested in picking up the Sirui 20mm or the 40mm for yourself, there are links in the description plus a discount code that can get you an extra 5% off Sirui's website. Those are affiliate links, so if you purchase from those links, it does support the channel. Thank you so much if you do. And if you enjoyed this video, maybe watch this video next, and don't forget to like, subscribe, hit that bell button so you never miss out on new young filmmaker content. Good luck filmmaking.